Good evening. I want to welcome you to our webinar tonight, our HFA Families webinar, Stop Sibling Quibbling. My name is Sandra Wilkes. I am the program coordinator for the HFA Families program. Lauren Nybert, our Blood Brotherhood coordinator, is also joining us tonight, kind of running some technical assistance in the background. So if you need anything, just let Lauren or myself know. We thank you for attending. We know that this can be a difficult time of evening, so we appreciate everyone attending. Just before we get started, I'd like to go over a few webinar pointers. Tonight's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. We welcome your participation and questions. However, your audio will be muted by our webinar system for the duration of the webinar, as this helps eliminate background noise that may disrupt the presentation. If you have a question, we encourage you to use the question box that is on the bottom right of your control panel. I will pass those questions along to our speaker. Throughout tonight's presentation, there are several audience poll questions. When the questions appear on your screen, you will have the opportunity to answer those anonymously, and we will share the audience feedback. I'll give you a countdown, so you'll know that you have so much time left to answer that question. And finally, HFA would like to acknowledge Novo Nordisk and AHF for their support of our Families program. Their support really helps make these webinars a reality for us. As I said, the title of tonight's webinar is Stop Sibling Quibbling. Our presenter is Diane Horbacz. Diane graduated from Seton Hall University with a degree in psychology. Her focus was on child psychology and the use of play therapy with chronically ill children. Diane obtained a master's degree in special education from William Patterson University, where she studied behavioral management and emotional and behavior disorders. Her extensive background entails teaching children with special needs at various age levels. Diane resides in New Jersey with her husband Gary and her 2 sons, Matthew and Justin, and her daughter Erin. As a mother of 2 boys with hemophilia, Diane began working as an education specialist within the hemophilia community 14 years ago. She created and directed Accreto's pediatric program, Caring for Kids, for 10 years, where she developed and presented interactive educational programs geared towards teaching children about their bleeding disorder. She is the author of several books for children and continues to develop educational material for children with special needs. And with that, I'm going to turn in the microphone over to Diane. We welcome Diane, and thank you so much for your expertise tonight.
Well, thank you. I believe, let me see if I can get this. Are you going to control the screens? Nope, I will. Nope. Will I control the screens?
You will control the screen.
I will control the screens. Okay. I believe that the first thing that we're going to be starting off with is a poll question. So did you want to take care of that?
Yes. So our first poll question is, what is your biggest parenting challenge? So audience members, if you will click one of those options that is on your screen, your options are, and you can select one or more. Biggest parenting challenge with siblings: dealing with jealousy and resentment, dealing with arguing and fighting, understanding causes of behavior, or all of the above. We'll take about 30 seconds for everyone to choose which one. Okay, I'm showing that the entire audience has voted, so I'm just going to give you a 5 second just to make sure. All right, Diane, 67% of our audience says that dealing with jealousy and resentment is their biggest parenting challenge. Then 33% say understanding the causes of behavior, and another 33% voted all of the above.
Okay, very interesting. Not so, I can't believe there's not as much arguing and fighting. That must be only my family. Okay, with that, what we're first going to do is we're going to, just really quick, these are a few of the objectives we would like to achieve during tonight's webinar. I don't believe that what I'm going to present is going to be something that many of you don't already know. You may even consider much of what we discussed as common sense. My goal for tonight is to have this session serve really to refresh your understanding and hopefully for each of you to take away just at least one new idea. Okay, children go through all sorts of stages of development. The ones parents most focus upon are usually stages of growth and physical development, because with these stages we can physically observe growing and progress in our children. However, children also go through other stages that are not as observable or as evident, such as stages of cognitive development, which is growth of thinking and understanding, stages of moral development, which is evolution of beliefs and values, and then there are stages of social and emotional development, which focuses on relationships with other people. Children go through all sorts of stages and phases, and behavior at many of these junctures are really manifestations of your child's decision-making skills as they learn how to navigate life. Childhood behaviors, including those that we consider challenging, are all exercises of learning, training, and rehearsals that occur in your home on a daily basis. And there's actually a really cute saying that I love that sort of captures the role of our homes, that our homes play in supporting the development of the child. It kind of puts things, at least for me, in kind of a unique perspective, and that is, home is really a tuition-free university where children study a lifelong curriculum of decision-making. So when your home at times seems like a battleground for your children, just remind yourself that it is really an institute of learning. In addressing today's topic, Stop Sibling Quibbling, it's going to be very helpful for us to review just a few basic stages of social emotional development, because psychosocial development impacts how our children relate to one another. And the stages of development that we're going to be referencing were developed by a psychiatrist by the name of Erik Erikson. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development is one of the best known theories of personality in psychology. And according to Erikson, the socialization process consists of 8 phases, but being that our topic is directed towards siblings tonight, we're going to focus only on the first 5 stages, which are the stages that children go through. Here we have Erikson's first 5 stages. The first one's pretty straightforward, social emotional development of a child. It's really dependent upon how they are handled, how they're nurtured and loved. And if a child is well nurtured, he or she will develop trust and become secure. A child who is neglected or not given love becomes insecure and mistrustful. During this stage, parents will not face sibling-related issues. However, the stage is important because it serves as a foundation for development. And a child who is loved and develops trust will develop a sense of security. They will flourish. They will flourish socially, and they will grow socially. The next stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. During this stage, children learn to become independent and in charge of their own behavior. Important events include gaining more control over things in their life, such as which food they're going to eat, toy preferences, clothing selection, and for a child with hemophilia, the choices could be related to their medical care, possibly deciding which Band-Aid they would like to use after an infusion, or maybe whether or not the infusion could be done at a kitchen table or at the kitchen counter. Children who successfully complete this stage, they feel secure and confident, while those who do not are left with a sense of more inadequacy and self-doubt. Now, as children grow and progress through this stage and actually subsequent stages, they're going to experience something that is referred to as psychosocial conflict. Now, these are conflicts or struggles that actually serve to help them grow. Common struggles that parents will encounter at this particular stage with a young child trying to establish independence or freedom include lovely tantrums, stubbornness, negativism, and of course, sibling battles. Okay, looking at the next stage, during the third stage, initiative versus guilt. The healthy developing child learns at this stage to imagine and to broaden his or her skills through active play. The child learns to cooperate with others and also learns to lead as well as to follow. In order to develop these skills, children, once again, will need to experience psychosocial conflict. And as nutty as that may sound, they need to experience sibling conflicts. They need to experience not cooperating, arguing, fighting over whose turn it is. Now, while the first objective of today's webinar is to provide a brief overview of social stages of development, The second objective is really to identify and recognize the role these psychosocial conflicts have in a child's life. Sibling conflict is healthy and necessary for social, emotional growth and development. Now, most parents try to prevent sibling scuffles in order to maintain peace in their homes. However, preventing these disputes denies kids the opportunity to learn the necessary skills that develop at this stage and in order to further prepare them for the next stages in life. A child who does not progress through this stage successfully will grow to become more of a dependent person and less confident. Although I know many parents listening in are probably most hopeful to walk away from this webinar with tips on how to prevent your children from battling, unfortunately that's not going to happen. What you will hopefully discover through this presentation is really the importance and value of sibling conflict and how to manage conflicts, not prevent, how to manage them so that your children will grow without you losing your mind. The fourth stage of social emotional development is confidence versus inferiority. Here the child learns to master more formal skills such as relating with peers according to rules, or progressing from free play to play that involves rules or requires teamwork and cooperation, such as participating in sports. At this stage, a child will develop self-discipline because they're beginning to learn and study in school. And at this stage, kids are also very happy about achievements, and they often feel bad about failures. But once again, children will learn and grow through the stage through psychosocial conflicts. By experiencing and successfully resolving any psychosocial conflicts, the child will learn to become trusting, independent, and will develop self-initiative. In the fifth stage and final stage during childhood, children are going to go through identity versus role confusion. At this time, teens learn how to answer, who am I? A young person acquires self-certainty, anticipates achievements, they begin to seek leadership, and they develop a set of ideals. A most common characteristic at this stage is role confusion, where teens are trying on various roles as they begin to shape their identity. With these stages in mind and the understanding that psychosocial conflict is a part of the growing process through each stage, we're now actually going to explore a few common issues that parents may expect in regards to sibling challenges. And with that, I believe that brings us to a poll question. Do we have somebody doing the poll question?
Yes, we have the poll on the screen right now. So how often do you spend
Okay,
one-on-one time
perfect.
with each child? So we'll just give folks a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll. All right, so Diane, it looks like 100% of the audience said once a week.
Wow, excellent. Okay, we'll actually address that poll question, not on the next slide, common issues, but on the following one when we get into how to deal with those issues. This slide, common issues that parents face, which actually seems to be, I think, if we said according to the first poll, 67% of families felt that jealousy, resentment were the primary issue, and rebellion. So our third objective for today's webinar is actually to identify, as we said, common issues related to siblings without a bleeding disorder. Now, having a sibling with a bleeding disorder may cause feelings of jealousy or resentment, and this is often the case because one child may receive one more attention from others within the family and also within the community. Sibling rivalry, struggles, battles, and quibbles, they can occur when an unaffected sibling reacts to feelings of jealousy and resentment. But prior to introducing any strategies on how to manage these challenges, I actually have a few parent must-dos. These particular must-dos can be referred to kind of as psychological guessing, because we can only make sometimes educated guesses or speculations about our children's behavior. The first parent must do is we need to determine the purpose of our children's behavior. In doing so, you'll often recognize that you recognize behaviors as really a means of seeking attention. One example of attention-seeking behavior is rebellion. A sibling of a child with a bleeding disorder may display rebellious behavior, keeping in mind that every rebellious act is a plea to treat me like I matter to you. We need to realize that children are always trying to seek attention. They want our attention, they need our attention, and they are going to get that attention one way or another. More often than not, children will seek our attention inappropriately. But before we can begin to tackle this concern in the family, before we can even begin to intervene and guide our children, parents need to do something very crucial. After recognizing that most inappropriate behavior is attention-seeking behavior, it's important for parents to understand the significance of being in tune with our children. But what does that mean, in tune? Well, in tune means that we need to know how our children perceive life. Now, without trying to sound too philosophical, we need to ask ourselves an important question. And that question is, what is reality? Reality is how your child views the situation. What exactly happened or what precisely is going on is not the real issue. It is what a child thinks that counts. Your child's perception of what is happening is the reality that you must deal with. As parents, we need to learn how to understand and relate to each child and his or her unique needs. And in order to truly know our child, we need to have a basic understanding of how they understand their world. More specifically, how they understand even their sibling's bleeding disorder. We must take the time to enter each child's private world. We must get behind his or her eyes and see life as our son or daughter sees it. As for how to get behind the eyes of your child, sometimes we need to do a little bit of what they call is psychological guessing. Now, in response to issues, how do we deal with these issues of jealousy, or resentment, or rebellion? My first parent tip is, and again, a lot of this may seem very much like common sense. Do not make one child the centerpiece of the family. First of all, if the family revolves around a particular child, that child will become shocked to learn that when he or she gets out into the real world, that the real world does not revolve around him or her. Additionally, focusing more attention on one child can lead to jealousy, resentment, and or inappropriate attention-getting behavior. And this is where we can actually address now our poll question. When you look at the second tip, it says celebrate each child. A lot of parents, unfortunately, don't do this. But what you need to do is you need to set up special one-on-one time with each child every week. A time set aside for you to communicate to that child that he or she is important and loved, and that you care. But that's not always easy for parents today because we're so busy juggling so many different things. It requires us to take a lot of more time to plan. And to be honest, it's not always easy, but in the end, it will be worth it. Third parent tip is talk with your child, but more importantly, use active listening techniques. When a problem or a sibling conflict or an issue such as jealousy arises, the very first thing you want to do is listen. When you actively listen to your child, it's very important you don't correct him, you don't lecture, you don't threaten, you simply let him know that you can see he or she's got a problem. Your second step is to respond to his feelings. Let your child know that you are aware of his feelings. Most parents, including myself, we often feel that our first duty is to correct our child or to lecture in some way in order to give the right solution or to point out the right answer. As parents, we're so compelled to do and to help our children. But rather than doing, we need to recognize that these are actually teachable moments, and we need to hold our tongues, and we need to listen to our children. Secondly, we need to validate. It's very important to validate his or her feelings and let him know that we do care. Finally, don't provide, but rather help your child find a solution to their problem. You can always guide the solution through suggested options to choose from, but don't choose the solution for your child. Encourage them to figure out the solution on their own. This is actually a very valuable lesson in life. And if we can reflect back onto that saying that our home is a tuition-free university, maybe this lesson we could refer to as, or this parent tip as conflict resolution 101. This is just a very important learning opportunity for our children. We definitely have another poll question here.
Yeah, so
we can have our moderator.
Yeah, can you hear me, Diane?
I can sure hear you. Yes, ma'am.
Excellent. So our third poll question is, when my children argue, I usually, and then audience, if you'll select one, tell my children that they should try to settle their dispute, try to settle the dispute so that the problem doesn't escalate. I try to do both of the previous listed options, or I just put in a pair of earplugs. So audience, if you'll vote, we'll take a second here. Give you guys about 5 more seconds. I'm going to close that poll. All right. I'm going to admit before I read the audience poll results, as a mom of a child with hemophilia, that I often do number 4. I'm just going to go on and admit that. But our audience says 80% tries to settle the dispute so the problem doesn't escalate. And then the remaining 20% of our audience, Diane says that they tell the children that they should try to settle the dispute amongst themselves.
Okay. And we also have a second poll question. We will address both as we go on to the next 2 slides, but both of them should be answered here.
Okay. So the second poll question is, how well does your child without a bleeding disorder understand his or her sibling's disorder? So the options are excellent age-appropriate understanding, a good age-appropriate understanding, poor age-appropriate understanding, or you're unsure. So attendees, this is your opportunity to vote. Lauren, why don't we give them 5 more seconds and then we'll go on and close this one out too. Okay, 60% report that their children have a good age-appropriate understanding and 40% are unsure, Diane.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and we will address those poll questions as I go through the next 2 slides. The next common issue, and very fortunate for our audience today that not many deal with fighting and arguing. However, first let me start off by saying that it's actually impossible to have children who don't fight. And there's no way to totally eliminate rivalry between siblings. All you can hope for realistically is to minimize it, because conflict in the home, particularly among siblings, is natural. In most cases, fighting is designed to get the parents needlessly involved in their hassles. Children usually fight for attention. They want an audience, and if you take away the audience, sometimes the fighting will stop. As parents, we cringe when we hear our kids arguing or fighting. However, fighting is a normal part of social development. So it's actually okay to let your children argue. First, however, it's very important to understand the dynamics of why our children are fighting in order to provide proper guidance in conflict resolution strategies. There have been a few times when I have actually given my children permission to fight. If they're fighting over something that I feel is really not significant, then I actually give them permission, not necessarily to go fight physically, but I will tell them, go work it out. So with that stipulation, with the stipulation that they need to do it, like go down into the basement so that I don't have to hear them, I remove myself from being pulled in as a mediator or as a referee. Part of social development involves conflict resolution. So when a teaching opportunity to resolve a really heated conflict arises, I give them permission and then I remove myself from the situation. The key is to remain calm and walk away. Not easy. And I have to admit that it requires me often to take deep breaths and to go to the quietest part of my house, and I even thought about purchasing a pair of earplugs. So kudos to anyone who would put in or the answer D to that one question using a pair of earplugs, because sometimes we need to kind of close our ears to what's going on and allow our children to work things out. But as you can see over, actually I have a must-do list from the parents' must-do list. In order to tackle the challenging of sibling battles and arguing, you actually must be very prepared for battle. And I think that's what it says, be prepared for battle, which is taking a deep breath and removing yourself from the argument and possibly getting earplugs. In my house, I go to the top floor and have them go to the basement. One important question that should be addressed here is, should fighting be a cause for concern when your child has a bleeding disorder? Well, verbal fighting is fine, and you can always follow up with discussion after the fighting has been resolved to discuss, again, conflict resolution strategies with your kids. Physical fighting, however, regardless of whether or not your child has a bleeding disorder, should never be tolerated, never be allowed. And if physical fighting does occur, a parent needs to take the time to explain to each child the implications of inflicting physical harm. For the child without the bleeding disorder, you may want to take that child aside at some point, but not during the heat of an argument or a fight, and have a discussion about what happens to his or her sibling when he hits or injures, hits or injures, the one with the bleeding disorder during a fight, which brings us to the poll question about how much your children understand. Now, I have to tell you, I have 2 boys with hemophilia, and I have a younger daughter. I can honestly say that I have raised 2 boys that have never hit each other or another person. I had done, so I thought, a rather successful job in teaching my boys the significance of why we don't hit or harm anyone. But I truly believe that it was their understanding of their bleeding disorder and the implications of physical harm that helped me to raise them to resolve conflict without physical contact. Well, then came my daughter. At the age of 12, I observed her arguing with her brother, who was 8 years old. I did my usual. I stepped back and I allowed them to, quote unquote, work out their differences. However, it backfired. She swung a punch for him, and it resulted in an infusion. Later, when I took her to the side for my little heart-to-heart conversation, although steam was probably coming from my ears, I didn't lecture. I made sure that I did what I was supposed to do. I used active listening, and I was actually astonished to learn that my 4-year-old had no idea what hemophilia was. I was so focused on educating my boys, whether it was through storybooks or discussion, that I completely overlooked the importance of educating my daughter. I guess ignorantly, I just assumed that she knew what hemophilia was because she was living in the same house where education was occurring for the boys. It's like she was learning by osmosis, as if information was going to be absorbed into her little brain because it is part of her surroundings. But what I failed to recognize was that she too required direct instruction. She needed me to read her the books about hemophilia and to have direct conversations. Immediately following this revelation, I immediately pulled out several children's books. I read to her, I have hemophilia and I am special. And then I pulled out another book, Infusion Time, and I just kept reading them to her. Soon after, my daughter's role underwent a complete transformation. She became more of a caregiver, and she wanted to help take care and protect her brothers. It got to the point that if she even saw them trip or bump into something, she would insist that they needed infusion. The valuable lesson that I learned through this experience, and hopefully that some of you may benefit from, is never assume that your child understands. Take the time to talk. Take the time to listen. Take the time to teach. And in that poll question, how much does your child understand? Years ago, I would have said, oh, my child has an excellent or a very good age-appropriate understanding. But nowadays, I would always check D. I would always say unsure. Because by selecting unsure, that keeps me in check. That doesn't allow me to always assume my child understands. It's very important when you have a sibling who is not affected that you really talk to them and really get to know what do they know and what don't they know. Never assume. Okay, in response to fighting and arguing, just a few suggestions. First is, don't get stressed over fighting. Accept that it's a normal part of social development. If you can change your perception towards arguing and fighting, you're going to improve your attitude. And with a more positive attitude, you will be much more confident tackling the challenges that go along with sibling rivalry. The second parent tip is, don't get pulled into a fight or an argument. Don't provide an audience and give negative attention. And if this is a problem that you feel is a good opportunity for siblings to practice conflict resolution skills, if you can, step back. Let them take charge. Do not become the mediator, and give them permission to work it out. The third parenting tip is always keep an open watch. Look for teachable moments to explain conflict resolution. Obviously, the most important teachable moments are not in the middle of an argument or a dispute, but when those disputes have settled down. Look for those teachable moments. At times when siblings are not fighting or arguing, that's when they're most receptive to our conversations. We need to take the time to teach them different ways to resolve conflict. We could try role-playing. My favorite is I always love to teach in parables. I like to tell them stories. Tell them stories about how maybe you and your own brothers and sisters used to fight and what the outcome was, or how you resolve problems. And if you have to, make up the story. They'll never know. Finally, play different games that help you to teach resolution conflict. Now, this concept of stepping back and giving permission to our kids to work it out, this is really based upon principles of reality teaching, and I'm a very big proponent of reality teaching. And it really sounds great in theory when you discuss it. However, I have to admit, although I've become pretty good at recognizing the value of sibling arguments and allowing my kids to work it out, well, you know what? Reality is there are times when my kids just really drive me crazy. And what pushes my buttons most is name-calling and speaking unkind to each other, being rude to one another. And in those instances, I struggle so hard. To step back, and sometimes I can't. And what often happens is sometimes I just honestly throw my reality techniques right out the window, and I do exactly the opposite of what I'm supposed to do, and I step in and I get involved. Am I supposed to do that? Well, sometimes it's just hard not to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you actually a tip, a little suggestion that I find really helpful in dealing with name-calling and speaking unkindly. I use this with my kids, and as a teacher, I use this in my classroom. I've taught my kids that it takes 7 positive statements to make up for every negative statement that you make. So when a negative statement is made, I have my child, if it's at home, or a student, if it's in my classroom, to come up with 7 positive statements. And I have found that this has actually worked very well in my home. It works very well in my classroom, and I urge all of you to try it out. So even though the reality teachings of stepping back, a lot of it can be very helpful, there are times when, it's tough. Kids know how to push our buttons, so sometimes we need to have, when we can't use our reality technique, sometimes we need to come up with, a backup plan. And the one that always really works well for me, particularly with name calling and speaking unkind, because that's usually at the crux or at the front of a lot of arguing. Okay, now remember, one of the biggest things, take time to talk to your children, take time to listen, take time to teach. Don't do as I did and wait for your 4-year-old daughter to throw a punch at her older brother with hemophilia to discover that she has no idea what hemophilia is. But very humbly, I have to tell you, it has demonstrated to me that as parents, we are going to make mistakes. And we're going to continue to make mistakes. We make them, and we're going to continue to make mistakes. That being said, I like this slide, a little advice regarding parenting and mistakes here that will hopefully allow you to be maybe easier on yourself as you navigate sibling challenges on your parenthood journey, and they are that mistakes are a part of the journey called parenting. I have to move my screen so I can read this better.
Diane, while you're doing that, can we go back just a minute
yes.
to the 7 positives for every negative? We had a question come in.
Yes.
Technique work on teenagers as well.
Will that technique work on teenagers? It works wonderful. It works wonderful on teenagers. It works very, very well. Yeah, no, it works well. Like I said, I've used it in the classroom. I use it in the middle school. I've used it in the high school. And I happen to have a preteen who's, well, 12 and a 16-year-old, and I'll even use it with my 19-year-old. And it's actually become like an automatic in the house. If normally the one that comes up with the negative comments is my 16-year-old, and he'll come up with something, and my 12-year-old will automatically say, Mom, he owes me 7 positives, and right away my 16-year-old has to give the 7 positives. So it actually, I have found a lot of success, but not just with my kids, like I said. I have found it in the classroom because they get it. They get it. They understand that a negative comment hurts so much that in order to undo it, you need to say 7 positives. And as a result, if you implement that enough in your home or wherever, you might actually get your kids stopping and thinking about it. A time in particular when I use this is I brought my kids on vacation last year. And the first day of vacation, I thought they were going to just drive me crazy with calling each other names. And I started doing it. And by the second day of my trip, I found my son starting to say, Erin, you're such a, and he'll stop. And then he'd look at me and he'd look at my sister and my daughter, and he'd say, oh, wonderful sister. And he would actually catch himself midstream just so that he wouldn't have to give her 7 positives. So if you implement it but in a positive way in your house, not as a sense of punishment, but use it as a teachable tool, as a teachable device, it's a great lesson in life. And even using it outside your home, it really shouldn't apply, honestly, just to children. There are a lot of adults that are not always kind, and I just teach my kids in general, not just children, in general. It takes 7 positives to take away the sting of one negative comment. I'm hoping that answered your question.
I think it did. Our audience member replied that she has a stubborn teen, and I kind of wanted to say, aren't they all? So, yeah,
oh, yeah.
She just responded, yes, that they are. And I see that one more of our audience members has their hand raised. I just encourage you to go down to that question box, type in your question, I'll see it, and then I'll pass it along to Diane. Diane, you can resume. Just want to throw that question in there while we were so close by that.
Okay, sure. No, and you know what? It's a great question, and I'm glad she asked that question because my experience again is not just in my home, but also in the classroom with different ages, and the kids respond. My students always respond really, really well to it. And of course, you're going to have those kids that might give you a hard time, but overall, it's been very positive. Now, just 2 little notes here on parenthood and mistakes, and I just kind of wanted to have a positive spin here for parents as they begin to navigate through all their sibling challenges, is that understand that mistakes are a part of the journey called parenting. It won't be easy. It won't always be fun, but it will be worth it. And the other one is parenthood is a long-term investment. It involves the sting of failure, the frustrations of setbacks, and the joy of success. Okay, and I do have another tip here, a final tip, which really goes without saying, is that relationships, how the importance of relationships come before rules. Teach your children to love others, to put others first, to be givers, not takers, and to realize that it makes a difference how they conduct themselves. If discipline in your home is merely a matter of rules posted on a wall, it won't work, because rules without relationships lead to rebellion. And with that being said, we have covered the basic objectives of tonight's webinar. I know we tapped upon several issues. We did the fighting, we did the arguing, jealousy, resentment, rebellion, and again, unfortunately, given the nature of a webinar, it's just a really very basic overview, but hopefully there was something that was presented or said during the course of the presentation that you're able to use as a takeaway. Again, a lot of it's common sense, a lot of it's common knowledge, things that you're familiar with, but maybe there was something said that just kind of rekindled your thought process, or maybe motivated you or encouraged you to maybe go out and buy those pair of earplugs and send your children down to the basement and let them resolve their conflict. It's more of a reality check. You know, this is part of social development. Children need these struggles, these sibling quibbles. They need these, and it's not always easy as parents, and especially if you have an aspect, another variable such as hemophilia involved. You know, you have jealousy because one child you think is getting more attention. And again, going back to hemophilia, it's very important that every aspect of family life, if the entire family is impacted by hemophilia. So every child should be involved in all aspects of each child's care. So if one child has hemophilia, let's talk about education. All the children should be educated equally. In my case, not just two boys being educated, but my daughter all along should have been an equal part of the education process and involved in all aspects. Okay, did you want to open up to any other? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, what about kind of sibling rivalry issues where the child with the bleeding disorder is the only child in the family with a bleeding disorder, and there's other siblings that don't have a bleeding disorder, and kind of their issues of jealousy and anger, and kind of solitude, if you will, because they're the odd man out. They have hemophilia, but their sisters or brothers do not. How would you address that?
Well, sibling rivalry in a family, regardless of hemophilia, is natural, and the cause of it is really ordinal position, birth order. You know, there are so many dynamics involved just in, you know, whether a child's the firstborn or whether the child's the middle child or whether or not the child is the youngest child. So there's so many other variables involved in why a child will behave the way that they're going to behave. However, if there's only one, if you have that child who behaves in such a way, well, as for example, oh, woe is me, or they're feeling bad, if a parent feeds into those feelings, the child is going to continue those feelings. The parent needs to find a way to make the child not to focus so negatively. They need to put a different spin on it. You know, and if it wasn't hemophilia, take that one child. If it wasn't hemophilia, the child might find another reason to draw negative attention to himself. Because in the end, the issue is not the hemophilia. The child's just using that hemophilia because hemophilia doesn't have to be that big of an issue. You know, there are so many different things in life. Hemophilia doesn't have to be the issue. But as parents, we can choose. We can make it an issue. We can allow our children to hold on to it as an issue, or we can help our child to let that not be the issue. It's very tricky dynamics. And again, is it the oldest child? Is it the middle child? Every family, there's so many different dynamics and different variables. And that's why it's very important to, as I said before, use active listening. Really try to, you know, play armchair psychiatrist or detective and really listen and look behind the scenes. What is it your child is really saying? Is it really the hemophilia? Or are they just saying, you know, I want attention? You just have to really look deep. And when they are using it as a means of negative attention, don't play into it, because kids are smart. They're very receptive. And there are many kids, and I've seen this before, that you have parents that maybe feel guilty or feel bad for the child with hemophilia. So a child can pick up on that, and the child will play to that. The child will play to the weakness that parent might have. So a parent has to be very, very careful in making sure that you're treating each child equally, but you're also treating them not equally, in the sense that each child's different. You know, I shouldn't treat my daughter the same way I treat my son, and I shouldn't treat my one son the way that I treat my third son, because they're all different. And hemophilia doesn't define them. And I don't treat them each differently because of a bleeding disorder.
So I hear you say, let go of the mommy guilt, let go of the daddy guilt. And I think that's a great message.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
We have another comment from an audience participant. She has twin 14-year-old girls. One is severe hemophilia and the other is a carrier. The non-hemophilia girl is very harsh and defiant at times and just mean towards her sister, saying statements like it's not fair. And the audience member wants to share that she loves your 7 nice things for a negative and is looking forward to trying that. So wanted to pass that along to you. Keep in mind,
good.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, keep in mind, you said 14-year-old girls. Because that's your primary issue right there. They're 14-year-old girls. And this too, honey, will pass. It's part of the growing process. So, yeah, it's part of dealing with 14-year-old girls. Yep.
Well, and I want to echo something you said. Oh, I want to echo something you said earlier about going back to the poll question and children's level of understanding of their siblings' bleeding disorder. Because when my children were younger, and I'm not sure if I shared up front that I have a 8-year-old and 12-year-old daughters, and then a 10-year-old son with severe hemophilia A and inhibitors. When my children were younger, I would, let's say, preschool, early kindergarten age, I thought we had the sibling thing licked. I totally thought they were fine. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. And when they did, it was kind of sweet and cute and not too traumatic for any of us. But then school age hit, and boy, they really started fighting and arguing and really having some issues. And what I finally come to realize was that we had never really talked about hemophilia to the girls. They didn't understand what it meant and what it went, you know, what hemophilia meant for our son and for our family. So just to reiterate your point of making sure kids.
You have to teach them the same, you have to teach them the same way you taught your son. The same exact way you taught your son. Yep. And they'll feel,
oh, go ahead.
And when you do teach them, they feel respected. They want you to be speaking to them about the bleeding disorder. They want to be included. And that will also solve some issues related to resentment. A lot of times a sibling who is not directly educated might feel resentment because they just don't totally understand. They don't totally get it. But we as parents, we think that they understand. I mean, they live in the same house, right? They're watching their brothers do infusions, and they're watching all this stuff. So we as parents assume that they understand. But their lack of understanding can be frustrating. Maybe there's some underlying fear, there's some uncertainty, and that can cause uneasy feelings such as jealousy, resentment, rebellion. And if we could make sure that we truly know what they understand, and if we make sure that we're on top of educating them, it's not a matter of just reading one book or 2 books, but constantly having checkpoints. You know, if my daughter, who's now 12, obviously I'm not reading to her infusion time, or I have hemophilia in special, but now that she's 12 years old and if I'm driving in the car with her, I'll have a little what I call a hemophilia 101 chat. I kind of do a check, make sure what does she understand, what doesn't she understand, and now that she's getting a little bit older, we're talking a little bit about, you know, the genetics. So teaching about hemophilia is really a continual process because they're understanding it differently at different stages of cognitive development. So you're continually, it's not like you teach at one age, you're continually, and by continually talking to the non-affected child about the hemophilia, you're including them in a very important aspect of your life, of their lives, and of the life of the child with a bleeding disorder.
That reminds me of a time when my youngest, she was about 6 at the time, was asking about the different levels of hemophilia, so mild, moderate, and severe, because I'm a carrier of hemophilia, so technically I'm mild, and she was trying to understand the mild versus severe, and I related it to taco sauce, how there's mild taco sauce and kind of, medium taco sauce, and then the really hot stuff. And that Thomas had the hot stuff. So that was an easy way for her as a 6-year-old to kind of understand the different levels of hemophilia. So, and again, we were talking earlier that conversation happened in the car. Pay attention in the car. Those conversations can really happen in the car sometimes too.
Well, in the car is one of the best places, because that is the one place where you can have undivided attention.
Absolutely. Does any of our audience have any more questions? Right now I show an empty question box, but we certainly have a few minutes if there's
even any comments that they would like to share with the audience, because I think one of the best ways of learning is by sharing experiences. If anybody else has an experience or a tip or a suggestion that they would like to add to the discussion, by all means, please do so now.
Yeah. So, and I'll share while we wait for maybe some people to type something in. I think for me personally, as a mom, I'm an only child. So this sibling stuff kind of threw me for a loop as a mom. And so hearing that every family has sibling issues, regardless of their bleeding disorder status, is good to hear. It's reaffirming to hear, to make sure that I'm not totally messing this thing up. So we have a question from an audience member. How would you approach your kids when the child with hemophilia let me start over. How would you approach your kids when the child with hemophilia no longer wants to deal with having hemophilia? How can the family as a unit discuss this?
When the child no longer wants to have hemophilia?
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe that this child doesn't want to adhere to their infusion schedule, or just kind of wants to ignore.
Is this like a young child or a teenager? I'm trying to figure out if are we dealing with rebellion? Because actually no child wants to have hemophilia.
Right. Let's give this audience member a second to respond to that, and I'll let you know. The child is 9.
Oh. Okay. Well, if the child is 9, if they're expressing that they don't want hemophilia, that's actually very natural, and the parent was probably a little bit probably surprised at that response. I'll bet you the child was fine with it prior to. Children go through different stages of cognitive development, and when a child is 7, 8, 9 years old, they're becoming much more aware, especially socially, aware of themselves and how other people perceive them. Whereas prior to that, they're much more egocentric, and they don't think about it. But they're really, the reason that a 9-year-old is feeling these things, don't take it too hard. It's because they're cognitively maturing. Their thinking and their thought process is that they're growing, and that they're establishing a greater understanding. And what you do need to do is as a family, yes, you can work through it, but be very cautious not to give unnecessary added attention if the child is expressing it like in a whining way or maybe a tantrum way. If a child is starting to act out, I don't want to do my infusion, or that's not the time to address the issue. A parent needs to be very matter of fact. If it's an infusion time, I'm sorry, you just have to say, I'm sorry you feel this way. We can discuss this later on, but right now it's very important that the infusion needs to be done. And at a time when the child is in a more of a receptive mode, that's a time when you can discuss it a little bit more. And it depends on your child, but there's certain things, certain ways that you can present it. And I can honestly tell you my secret, because I have the 2 boys with hemophilia. I remember when my boys were little, and I never wanted to raise boys that thought, oh, woe is me, I have hemophilia, I don't want hemophilia. And my hidden secret was, when they were little, I sponsored a child with hemophilia from a developing country through Save On Life. And actually, as of today, our family sponsors 30 children. And we learn about these children, and we have a very deep understanding of how children in other countries really, I should say, suffer from their bleeding disorder. So my boys really have a different perspective on hemophilia. My sons live with, thank God I live in a country where there's medical care, there's medication. So my boys walk with gratitude in their step. That honestly for me, that's not going to work for all people, but that has been my godsend by allowing our lives to parallel the lives of people in other countries who are not as fortunate. So rather than focusing on, oh, woe is me, I can't do this, or oh, woe is me, I can't do that, or I need infusions, my focus has been a 360, and we focused on all the fortunate things. You know, look how lucky we are that we have medical care. Look at how fortunate we are that, you know, we have Factor, and the fact that we can do infusions, and the fact that we can play baseball, and we can ride bikes, and we can do this. And so I've kind of used that as my little, I guess, my teaching tool. It's worked for us, but don't give too much attention to negative behaviors, and look for opportunities to opportunities for when they are really in that receptive zone to be able to have little heart-to-hearts. And you have to kind of know your child, make sure you validate their feelings, and use a lot of reflective listening. I hope that was of help.
Yeah, no, I think that, and you hit the nail on the head, because we had a couple of follow-up responses from that audience member, that it was specifically about adherence to treatment and how to engage the entire family and the other children in the family. And I think that's a really great suggestion of opening the children's eyes up to a world view. Another question came in: how would you handle a situation when you have twins, both with severe, one has an inhibitor and the other doesn't? The issue is the one with the inhibitor is getting more time with doctor's visits. The other one seems a little competitive for attention to get attention. Any suggestions there?
Okay. Well, the dynamics there is you have twins. And by nature, the twins are probably going to feel that everything should be equal. And this situation is not. It's hard to say without actually knowing the dynamics. Do you know how old these twins are?
2. They're 2.
Oh my goodness. Okay, that makes it very easy. That makes it, and that's just, okay, right there, take the hemophilia and put it on the side. This has nothing to do with hemophilia and everything to do with attention-getting behavior. And I think when you have 2-year-olds, and if one's getting more attention with the other, I'm assuming that you're bringing both twins to the doctor's office, and if one is being examined, you know what, have the doctor turn around and just do the same for the other one, because at 2 years of age, their thinking is so concrete that they don't understand things in more complex terms. So basically, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What you do for child A is you do for child B. If child A gets a popsicle, child B gets a popsicle. And I think at that stage, when they're so young, you need to treat them equally. Even though their hemophilia is not the same, you need to do it a little bit, you need to keep them on like parallel level. And that will change as he gets older, and he's able to, as he cognitively matures and he's able to understand. But at this stage, this is all about attention. You know, put the hemophilia aside and just recognize that you're just dealing with very common 2-year-old twin behavior.
And actually, I think our next comment ties in nicely to that. It's from another one of our audience participants who was given a helpful tip by a teacher earlier this year during some rough times with her non-hemophilia child. And the quote is, "Fair is not being equal. It's about giving everyone what they need." And I think that's a good concept to remember.
It's excellent.
And this mother goes on to share that the child with hemophilia is actually much easier in many ways. It's the non-hemophilia sibling that gives her the most trouble.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very good quote. But going back to the mom with the 2-year-olds, they're just a little bit young, you know, at that point. There'll be plenty enough time for them to learn, you know, fair versus, you know, there's time for that. But right now, I think with 2-year-olds, they're still babies, you know.
And invest in lots of Band-Aids, pass out Band-Aids to everybody, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Well, Diane, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, you know, every parent's situation is going to be very unique. And I think what's most helpful, I heard one parent got advice from a teacher, and I think just by parents networking, listening in on a webinar and talking to each other, we act as a support system for one another, and we all help each other on this challenging journey called parenting. And sometimes we can pick up little tips or suggestions or advice from one another, and we just you know, we're strong when we are unified. So, and remember, it's not parenting's not easy. And like my tip says, it won't be easy, it won't always be fun, but it will be worth it. And honestly, to everyone, I hope that this webinar served for you as a refresher for you, and that everyone is able to leave maybe with at least one new idea.
Thank you. Diane, I'm going to start wrapping things up here because we're at the close of our hour. It goes so quickly. If you wouldn't mind advancing to that very last slide.
There we go.
Yeah, there it goes. Okay. Just two final comments from our audience. Very inspiring tips. They thank you. And a mom comments that a child may not remember what you said or did, but he or she will remember how you made them feel. And I think that's an excellent comment to start wrapping things up. And to echo what you said, Diane, a lot of what we're doing here at HFA and our families program is trying to network families. So thank you to Diane for helping us do that tonight through the webinar. Each of our participants will get an email from us within the next hour that has a link for you guys to give us an evaluation and tell us how we did tonight on this webinar. And we would very greatly appreciate your feedback. So please take just a minute to complete that survey. Also, there will be a link in that email for you to sign up for our Dads in Action, our Moms Connect programs. It's another link. You'll click on it and fill out some information so that you can be a part of our Moms and Dads network, and make sure that you get invitations to these webinars and when things are happening in your area locally. So we encourage you to do that. Later this week, we will launch a sibling toolkit on coping with sibling issues that will include the recording of tonight's webinar and links to other resources that are out there that could be of help to you. Really interesting stuff, so I encourage you to do that. Our next big event, we will probably have some more webinars coming up. Stay tuned to the hemophiliafed.org website for our webinar schedules. Please like us on Facebook. We have daily posts about what's going on in the world of bleeding disorders, and that's a good way to stay connected. But our next big event is our HFA Gears for Good bike ride. We're having two this year, one in New Hampshire and one that runs from West Virginia down into Washington, D.C. If you're a biker, or even if you're not, this is a great way to get involved. I'm told, I have not done it, but I'm told that that path from West Virginia down to D.C. is downhill, and it's not too bad, but it's a 3-day event, and the funds raised for that go to help families in the bleeding community who need a little extra financial assistance through our Helping Hands program. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight. Thank you so much to Diane and her expertise. I definitely was given some tips to help me get through some of the parenting issues that I go through with my family, and I hope you guys all did too. Thank you guys so much. Look forward to having you on another webinar. Good night.